Well, good morning to everyone. When I was 22 years old or something, I was I lived in Dallas, going to seminary, and I had a few different internships there. But for this one year, I was interning at a very affluent church in the middle of Dallas, and there were many affluent people there, people of note, you know. And one of them had just been elected a couple years earlier as the Texas state representative for the 108th district, and part of his district was in Dallas there, and his name is Dan Branch. Dan Branch is a cool guy. I think he was a representative from 2003 to 2015. So he would have just been elected that year. It was 2003. But one day he had a dinner at his house, and his house wasn't far from the church. It was an old Texas kind of mansion house, and it was impressive. And he had a lot of money, and he knew a lot of people who were important, and he had those people over to his house for supper. And he also invited some of the people from the church. And for some reason, I also got invited to that, which I was like a little intern, and I was really uncomfortable, okay? It wasn't my style. But Dan Branch was awesome. He is this very powerful person. He's a state representative. This is his house, and but he was really cool, and he didn't have to talk to me or give me the time of day, but he did. And I sat at a table with him, and he had a conversation with some 20-year-old kid who had nothing to say or to offer anything, but he did that, and I always remember that. He was a really kind man. But those situations, those kind of meals, you understand the uh, the disparity between what I am in the world and who Dan Branch is, right? And so there's sort of an imbalance there of how much power people have in the world. But but Dan Branch was a good man, and that's why I want to tell you that story. And he didn't have to be. This could have been a place where he was trying to show off or demonstrate how powerful or wealthy he is, and just trying to impress people. But he wasn't. That's not what he was. He really just genuinely wanted to have these people in his home, and the people he happened to know also happened to have some uh, notoriety in the world, and then some of them didn't, and that didn't matter to Dan Branch. When we look at the text today in Luke's Gospel, Luke chapter 14, it opens with sort of a Dan Branch scene. There's a guy who's one of the leaders of the Pharisees, it says in verse 1. Those people are called the Sanhedrin. The Sanhedrin is the high law court, high spiritual government of the people. This guy, and there's only like 70 people in the Sanhedrin of all the people in the region, and he's one of them, this guy. And he's hosting a meal at his house, and all of the important Sanhedrin-y kind of people are there, and this guy has power. But this guy doesn't have the same kind of heart that Dan Branch does, and not really do anyone else that's there, except for Jesus, who was also invited. So he's at this fancy meal with these people of power and influence. This guy, the host, is a member of the Sanhedrin, and the meal is taking place on the Sabbath. And So they were watching, looking at Jesus very closely. They're not sure what to make of him. And there in front of Jesus, he says, is this man suffering from dropsy. And Jesus answered and spoke to these lawyers, these governors, and said, is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not? And it's always interesting when Jesus makes people fall silent. And this is one of those cases. They don't dare answer him. These experts of the law, these officials of the government, the religious government at least, they don't dare answer this theological question. They're afraid of what might happen. They've heard stories about people who start talking to Jesus and start talking Bible with Jesus, and they don't want to get into that with him. They kept silent, and Jesus took hold of the man and healed him and sent him away. And then Jesus looks around at the people, the dinner guests, and he said, if you have a son or you have an animal, an ox, and that son or that animal falls into a well, would you not immediately pull him out to rescue him, even if it's the Sabbath? And they could make no reply to this. Isn't that weird? I mean, we could sit in this room and reply easily, well, yeah, obviously. What's the big deal? But we have to understand how important the Sabbath was and what their motive was. They're trying to honor God. They think it's right to not do any work on the Sabbath, and healing is a form of work, and so if you heal, you're dishonoring God, you're disobeying. They're trying to do the right thing, but they've lost the big picture of who God is and what his heart is. And Jesus is trying to help them reorient their life to make the important thing, and the center, the center. Don't you have a son? Don't you have an ox? What if it fell into a well? Don't you save it out of the well, even if it's the Sabbath day? But they couldn't reply to this. And so he tells them a parable, starting in the next verse. He tells a parable to the invited guests when he noticed they had been picking out the places of honor at the table, saying to them, when you're invited by someone to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for someone more distinguished than you may have been invited by him, and he who invited you both will come and say to you, give your place to this man, and then disgrace you. In disgrace, you proceed to occupy the last place. But when you are invited, you should go and recline at the last place, so that when the one who has invited you comes, he would say to you, friend, move up higher, and then you will have honor in the sight of all who are at the table with you. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. And we'll keep reading here in verse 12. He also went on to say to the one who had invited him, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors. Otherwise, they might also invite you in return, and that will be your repayment. But when you give a reception, invite the poor and the crippled and the lame and the blind, and you will be blessed, since they do not have the means to repay you. You will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. So verses 7 and following, Jesus tells a little parable. Be careful where you sit when you get to these kind of meals like they're at right now. But then he turns directly to the guy whose house it is, who's hosting the meal. And he gives them a beatitude, a blessed. Blessed is the one who. That's what he says in verse 14. You will be blessed if this. This is the kind of person that will be blessed. Blessed is the one who does things for people who cannot repay them. That's the beatitude. He says, you do this, and there's a bunch of reciprocity. When I went to the house of Dan Branch, there's no way I could ever host a meal to honor him and do for him what he did for me. It's impossible. It will always be impossible. Jesus says to this Sanhedrin guy, you host parties, and then you get invited by other people and do the same, and you all repay each other. And, well, then you've already had your reward, haven't you? But when you do something for people to such an extent that they're not able to pay you back, not able to reciprocate what you've done for them, Jesus says that's the type of person that is blessed. And you and I have experienced that. I could ask you to try to recall a time where that's happened for you before. This happened to us just this past week. We had 2 cars that were out of commission. Nothing. 2 cars and 5 people in our family. That's not an equation that works very well. But there are people in our church, like the Shallots and the Shinborns, who did stuff for our family that I will never be able to reciprocate, never be able to repay. Helped us make it through the week, helped us have vehicles that work. There's no way that I can do for Nick or for Dave and Mary what they did for me last week. How do you become a person like that? It's being shaped and molded by the gospel, by Jesus. To have a heart to do for people what they cannot repay. It's a formula called the gospel. That's the heart of Jesus. That's the heart that Jesus is trying to cultivate in people that are his disciples. And Jesus says that is a formula of blessing. That's a beatitude. If you go through your life and you are constantly on the lookout for how can I help? How can I show the love of Christ? And in particular, where can I do that in places that people can't reciprocate it in the way that they would want to? Jesus says that's a life of blessing. And you're not going to get repaid on earth. But God doesn't forget those. And Jesus says you are repaid in the resurrection of the righteous. Now, we read a text this morning, but it wasn't Luke 14. It was actually a text written by Jesus' brother, James, in James chapter 2. And if you weren't paying attention to the heading, this is Luke 14 or this is James 2, you could be forgiven for mixing up the 2 texts in your head because they sound exactly the same. These 2 brothers, they kind of, it's not hard to imagine that they kind of ended up with the same theology, you know? And in James chapter 2, James sounds a lot like his brother. This is the text that we read this morning. It's the same scenario, right? The same scenario about showing favoritism, reciprocity, a theme of humility. It's all the same stuff that James is talking about. But at the end, what he says in verse 12, so speak and so act as those who are to be judged by the law of liberty. And I love that phrase, law of liberty. What does that mean? When do laws and liberty go together? Most people don't immediately associate the two, liberty and law. But of course, the more you think about it, the more you understand that law and liberty go hand in hand perfectly. We have a history of people trying to show those two as good friends, law and liberty. But James here is saying, if you want to follow the law of Christ, it is the law of liberty. People following the law, people doing the law that Christ has given us, the foundation of that and the goal of that is freedom. Law is not meant to enslave. And if I'm a follower of the law of Christ and it ends in enslavement or captivity and it doesn't result in a ministry of freedom for others, then I'm not following the law of liberty like Christ wants me to. Those people, the Sanhedrin guys at that table, they were trying to follow the law of God, but it was not resulting in anyone experiencing the freedom of God. They had people coming by who they wouldn't give the time of day to, wouldn't support the healing of, because they were trying to follow God and honor the Sabbath. James and Jesus understand that the law is about freedom. The law is the thing that God gives to these people who are freed from Egypt. They're part of the same story. This is what a people who have been freed look like. This is what they do. And the law of Christ is the same thing. We have been freed from our captivity. So don't put yourself or someone else in bondage, again, who has already been freed. It's the law of liberty. And the key outgrowth, the key practice of that is what James says in verse 13. For judgment will be merciless to the one who has shown no mercy, but mercy triumphs over judgment. Or mercy boasts against judgment is another way you could translate that. I love that phrase too. Mercy triumphs over judgment. Mercy boasts against judgment. It's not a very merciful way to think about mercy, is it? Boasting against judgment. But it's a play on words that I think makes the point. Mercy has confidence. Mercy knows it has more power and can defeat judgment. It boasts against it. It triumphs over judgment. Like these two things wrestling each other in a wrestling match, mercy triumphs. Mercy is stronger. Mercy is greater than judgment. And this gets us into another tangled discussion, because no one supports justice and its friend judgment more than God. We give praise to God all the time because he is a God of justice, and his judgments are right and true and good. We need that. We desire that, and God is that. But God is also a God of mercy. And both of those are important. Both of those are important. God is the God of judgment, but he also says that mercy triumphs over judgment. And he knows that mercy is more powerful than judgment. We had a situation at our camp session this year, middle school kids. One of the campers, committed a great offense, broke the rules, and this was a serious offense that should get you sent home. Didn't cause harm to anyone else or anything. It was just a personal choice this camper made, and it was against the rules, and you should get sent home for that. Well, our director, he did a really good job, and he really was seeking out wisdom from others, and he talked to first the small group of leadership there. I, as the head teacher, and the head counselor, she said what she thought should happen, and I said what I thought should happen, and the director kind of takes those into account. And then he expanded the circle to include other people, asking them what is the wise thing to do, what should we do in this situation. Then he expanded it out to some of the people who have been around the longest, former directors or elders, that sort of thing. And this story, it doesn't matter what the decision was, but what I noticed is that anyone over a certain age, they all said the same thing. And they all said, show mercy. And it was so interesting to see that. Why would that be true? The people who are the wisest, they all are saying the same thing. yeah, this was this big deal, but if you're asking me, I would show mercy to this person. These are the people who have been around the longest. These are the people who are the wisest. These are people who probably they've had more moments in their life where they've been shown mercy, and they know what that's like. These are people who probably have grandkids, and they know what mercy looks like more than I do as just a parent. I don't know the answer of why that was or how that happened, but I just thought, man, that's really interesting. Everyone who's been around the longest said, show mercy. I've been shown mercy before. A lot of times, I think I told you guys a story a while back about one of the worst things I've ever done. I didn't tell you what it was, but it's a story about mercy. I guess I don't care. What happened was I was 16 years old. I had a driver's license now, and I went to a store like 1 inch away from our church building, and I made a decision in my heart to do a very bad thing. And I decided to steal something from this store. And I'm still really ashamed of it, and it was really the wrong thing to do. Okay. To make it worse, the thing I stole was a form of tobacco. So that just makes it way worse because I was only 16 years old. This was a major offense, right? So I walk out the doors of the store, and there's the security guard waiting for me because I must have looked like on the video camera. I don't know. I know what I was feeling. I was super scared. And I was looking around back and forth. It was so easy to know what was about to happen. But they were watching me, probably laughing, probably drinking Diet Coke or something. And all right, he's going to leave the store. Let's go stand out there. Once you get out the store, then you stole it. So get me, sir, come with us. And then they take me into the bowels of the store, places I didn't even know existed in this store. And they show me the video, and they take my mugshot picture, and I get in huge trouble. I'm not allowed to ever go back to that store again, which is the store right next to our church. And like every time there's a potluck, people go to that store and try to buy stuff. And sometimes my parents would ask me to go get it, or someone else from church, and then I'm like, oh no, maybe someone else should go. So I was scared. I was freaking out, and these people were really intimidating, and I was in trouble from the law, and I was receiving that justice. But there was an even bigger law and a bigger lawman that I was afraid of, and it's the person that they made me call while I was sitting in that back room, and that was my dad. I had to call my dad. I had to tell him what is happening, where I am, and what I've done. And that was the worst moment in my life. And then I had to take the drive home, the drive of shame, my parents' car, drive it home, and I have to face my dad when I get home. And he's going to be angry. He's going to be upset. And this is going to be bad. And this is going to be the worst moment of my life. Because he's angry, he's upset, and ultimately he's disappointed. So I get in my house, and everything's quiet, and I go down into my bedroom, and my dad follows me down there. And he asked me again, so what happened, and why did you do it, and what's going on? I told him the story, and he said, well, I think you've had enough trouble for one night. And then he said goodnight to me and went to bed. What he was doing in that moment shaped who I would become. He was extending mercy to me in that moment. He had no business doing that. But he understood that mercy triumphs over judgment. I have this phrase that some people agree with, some people don't. It's one I made up when I was trying to be cool one time. It's justice is always right. Mercy is never wrong. Justice is always right. Mercy is never wrong. Maybe that's true, maybe it's not. But my dad was in the right, and everyone is in the right. Justice is always right. We should never feel bad about carrying out justice, because that's part of God's heart. But mercy is never wrong. It's never the wrong thing to do, to extend mercy. And in fact, that has the power to shape and change someone's heart way more than justice ever will, or ever could. That's what I've experienced in my life. That's what I know. That's what these the old guard staff members understood about this camper's heart. He said, "Yeah, you can carry out justice here, but if we're really about changing someone's heart today, if you want that kid's heart to be changed, it's going to come easier and greater by showing mercy in this moment." That's what they understood. And they, like Jesus, like James, are just trying to get that through to people like me. And it's my prayer that I will continue to grow in that area of extending mercy. There's a lot of judgment in our world, a lot of opportunities for us to judge, and a lot of opportunities for us to be judged. Some of those are right judgment, some of them are not. But in a world of judgment, Jesus says, mercy. Mercy triumphs over judgment. Let's extend mercy as we have opportunity to this week. And let's stand and sing.